Today I want to talk about gain staging. Just over 2 years ago, I uploaded my gain staging with a VU video to the YouTube channel, and it has proved without doubt to be my most popular video. And following up with the comments underneath that video, whilst many people felt that it was really helpful and helped simplify the whole gain staging aspect of mixing, some people still found it a little bit confusing or it wasn't working for them. So the idea behind this video is to revisit the concept and explain it in a easier to understand way, a shorter way, and also offer a cheat sheet that you can download and keep by your side as you try to implement this method to see if it works for you. I still maintain that gain staging is good practice. It will help you if you ever work outside of the box, if you find yourself working in a studio, having some idea about how to set up the levels in your mix and the relative levels, particularly between the kick and bass guitar, when you start mixing, it's going to really help you. I think that also the method stops that dreaded moment where you realise that you're going to have to pull back all your faders, and that might affect some dynamics processing you've got happening, and it can just be a bit of a nightmare. So by setting up your mix like this from the outset, so that it's not just the master fader we're concerned with the input stages on any analog plugins you're using throughout your mix, then you can be pretty safe in knowing that you're not introducing any distortion through riding your input stages a little bit on the hot side on some of your analog plugins. Now, the problem I had initially with gain staging and the concepts around gain staging in a DAW were it was just really time consuming to set up. Some methods will have you gain staging every single track, which is fine if that's works for you and it's how you understand the process, then do that. That's perfectly fine, and you probably don't really need to watch any more of this video. But if you are the sort of person who is getting frustrated at the time it takes to gain stage a mix and think it must be an easier way, then this method may very well work for you. Now, the problems typically that you can experience when not gain staging, or if your gain staging isn't working how it should, is that you get less headroom to be able to apply the processing usually needed to complete a mix. So things like compression, EQ, parallel compression, all those processes are gain stages in their own right. And so by setting up your mix at the start, using a method that will give you that headroom, you're going to stop that whole rebalancing nightmare that can happen. Now, one kind of final caveat to this is that gain staging really requires experimentation. You've got to play around with some of these methods, and some of the numbers might not quite work for you for whatever reason, depending on how you like to process your audio. So in order to learn how to use gain staging more effectively, then you've just got to try out these different methods and see which one works best for you. So in my method of gain staging, it's boiled down to basically 5 steps. The first step involves just looking at your tracks, looking at the waveform and making an assessment. Does that guitar track look hot? Does that snare track look hot? Just those basic decisions will really help you out. It's done so quickly, and with experience it becomes second nature. And again, if you want to know more about what I'm talking about here, by just lovely boy. So what do I mean by looking at the tracks, looking at the waveforms? Well, let me show you. This is a static mix here. It's at the very early stages of a static mix. There is no processing instantiated, but I've imported all the tracks And I've gone through and I've already looked to see if I think any of them are looking too hot. And some of the guitars I felt were looking a little bit hot, and some of the synths. So what does that mean? Well, in Pro Tools, we have clip gain. And where you can see that clip gain number is here down in the bottom left of each audio file. So here you can see on this Gretsch guitar, I've pulled down the level of this track by 6 dB. You can see actually on this guitar melody, I've pulled that track down by 12.5. And then this track again here, the Rickenbacker, pulled that down by 6. Same again with the synth. So what did they look like beforehand? That's the question. So that is the synth track. And you can see that it's looking pretty hot. There's not much headroom there between the loudest sections of the waveform and effectively clipping the audio file. So that is a hot file to me. And so all I did was just pulled it down to something more reasonable, which in this case was about 6 dB, which is a good number in audio engineering terms. And what that results in is an audio file where the actual waveform takes up roughly the middle third of the mono track in this particular instance. This is a stereo synth, and the top is the left-hand side, the bottom is the right-hand side, and as you can see, the waveform is sitting about roughly in the middle third, and that's a really good sort of rule of thumb, really, when setting up your audio files like this. Now, something I want to stress is that this is all done in a matter of probably 2 or 3 minutes, and it's just a cursory glance to look at the files as they've come in to see if they look as though they're going a bit hot. This is just a little sort of section of the pre-mixing phase that I find really helps me later on down the line. So that's the first step, done quickly, not overthought in any way. And on this particular static mix, you can see that I decided not to pull down any of the drums, so you can see what sort of level they're sitting at, because it doesn't matter if any are too loud or too quiet. As I get going, mixing, I can just easily go in and change them. So with that step done, we can move on to the next step. Step 2 involves getting a VU meter instantiated on your mix bus or your mix output, the very last point at which your mix leaves your DAW or the point at which your mix is captured. Now on this mix that I've got here in front of me, I have all my individual tracks going through group buses. I've got these group buses here. The first one is for drums and bass, then I've got guitars, keys, vocals and effects. So all the individual tracks are routed through these buses, and then these buses are routed to my mix bus, which is here. You'll notice that all of my processing is bypassed. I've got VCA faders here. They are just a convenient way for me to solo and mute my groups, so ignore those. They're nothing really to do with this method. But here is my mix bus and here is my mix print. I like to print my mixes in real time. I like to hear them going down to tape, and it's just another quality checkpoint for me to hear how my mix is sounding before I package it up and send it off to a client. So this is a great place to put a VU meter that's going to capture everything that's happening in my mix. The VU meter here is the Klanghelm VUMT or VUMT, but you can use any VU meter that you happen to have. There's the Waves VU meter. You can even use VU meters on plugins that are on your mix bus if they happen to be in the right spot, i.e. after all the processing. If that's not the case, just stick a VU meter here, either at the very end point, the last point of your mix, or on a print track if you use one like this. You can, of course, put it on the master fader. The important thing of note is that all VU meters have a calibration point. So you can set this calibration point to whatever works for you, and for me, that has been minus 14 dB. And what minus 14 dB means here as a calibration point is that 0 VU on the VU meter, whenever the needle hits around here, 0 VU equals minus 14 dB. Now I find that works really well for me because I'm mixing the box. I don't use any outboard gear. If you do use outboard gear, you may find that minus 18 works better and avoids any potential overloading of your input stages of your outboard gear. And like I said earlier, experiment with these numbers and see what works best for you. The great thing about using a VU meter is that it's like just glancing at a wristwatch. Now, not everybody wears a wristwatch because why do they need a wristwatch? They've got a mobile phone. They'll look at their cell phone to see what the time is. Well, that's okay, but you've got to find your cell phone. Is it in your jacket pocket? Is it your trouser pocket? Is it in your bag? You know, a wristwatch, on the other hand, just serves a purpose to sit on your wrist so you can glance at it and get the time instantly. And that is how I think about these VU meters. It will sit at the top of my session throughout a good portion of, well, certainly all the static mix and then into the full mix so that I can just glance at it to make sure my mix isn't getting too hot. And in terms of the mix, I'm looking at the needle to be hitting around about 0 to +1 maximum. But in terms of gain staging, I'm looking at a couple of different numbers. And I'll get into those numbers in a second. What first of all you need to know is the processing that is currently instantiated as I work through this gain staging section of the static mix. I always have some sort of analog character plugin on the mix bus. And on this particular mix, it happens to be the Red 17, which is the Abbey Road console. All that's doing is boosting a little bit of the high frequency. Now, as we know, boosting EQ is adding volume. So I like that plugin at the moment for adding that on my mixers. Then I have a tape machine, followed by another analog EQ, which has no boosts or cuts happening here. It's just switched in. It's all very subtle stuff. What's also worth pointing out is that I have a limiter on my mix bus. I always have a limiter on my mix bus. It's a really common thing to do to stop any red lights at the master fader. I'm not using it as a limiter. I'm not boosting. It's just there to catch the peaks, which usually come from the snare drum. When you use this method, if you use minus 14 as the calibration point, which is hotter, 4 dBs hotter than minus 18, it's likely you will get some clipping lights flicking on and off as you mix if you don't use a limiter. What's the next step then? Okay, let's take a look. What I do is I solo the drums. I solo the drums and listen to the drums and I look at the VU meter. I've got a static mix here of the drums that I've currently been working on. It's sounding pretty good at the moment. So let's have a look and see what that looks like on the VU meter. What I'm looking for is whenever the kick hits, I want to see the meter, the needle, hit around about -7. Doesn't have to be perfect. Don't overthink this. Remember, this is a wristwatch. You're just glancing at it and it's just going to give you that feedback you need to know that your kick is in roughly the right spot. What does it look like on a chorus? Let's take a look. So you can see that on the heaviest hits, it is going a little bit past -7, but that's fine because it's only happening very occasionally. So that's looking good. It's looking in the right ballpark on the VU meter. So what do we do next? Well, next I solo the bass guitar. So we've got the drums and bass soloed together now. And what I'm looking for on the VU meter now is that when the bass and the kick are playing simultaneously, that the VU meter needle is hovering around -5. So let's see what's happening now. Okay, so you could really see that happening in the chorus. Makes sense, the choruses are usually louder than the verses. Once you've got those two levels set, roughly, glancing at the VU meter, they're in the right ballpark, move on. Keep the meter open as you mix, as you continue building your mix. You've now got your drums and bass happening. You're probably going to bring in your guitars and blend those with the drums and bass. You're going to bring in the synths, keyboards, pianos, whatever. You're going to bring them all in. And what you're now looking for is just to be glancing at the VU meter to make sure that the mix doesn't get too hot as you start adding processing. And that's normal, that's perfectly fine. These numbers in the static mix stage will give you the headroom you need to continue the mix and bring in all your instrumentation and vocals and all your processing so that the mix itself ends up with headroom. Your limiters there are going to be catching any peaks, so you're not going to be getting any red lights anyway. But the headroom at your master fader is going to be in a good spot for mastering, and it's going to be loud enough for referencing purposes against commercial mixers. Above all, don't spend too much time on this. Don't agonise over the numbers. Use the VU meter to get you in the right ballpark. Build your mix using your experience as a music listener. And above all, just have fun with the process. Don't forget to check out the description below to get the link to download the cheat sheet for this method. Also in the description, I will put the links to the original gain staging videos that I put out on the channel if you want to go a little bit deeper. If you want to see me actually mixing a song from start to finish, where I use this technique and you can see it in action, move by move, then there's a link in the description to my Simply Mixing Rock Masterclass, which covers a mix from start to finish in 11.5 hours of video content where no stone is left unturned. Okay, that's all from me. I'll see you in the next video.